Over the last couple of years, I had a big video planned for the Pokemon series. I was never entirely sure where it was going to go or on what game it was going to be on, but I eventually chose to refocus that video towards breaking down Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, since I firmly believe them to be exceptionally awkward games in the Pokemon series, both from its confusing status as a kind of, but not really main series entry in the Pokemon franchise, as well as its aims as a remake of 1998's Pokemon Yellow. With the amount of time that I wanted to spend on that video, that's probably never gonna happen, so I'm taking this opportunity for this video to talk about my criticism of Pokemon Let's Go and the identity crisis that it seemed to have as Game Freak's first home console Pokemon game, which left myself in particular feeling confused and unconfident in the series for some time. Though we're on the horizon of Pokemon Sword and Shield releasing at the end of this year, the Galar region will have to wait, because I don't think it's time to leave Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee behind quite yet, although I'm sure a lot of you already did that months ago. Now, I also don't think I need to explain why. If you're watching this video in the first place, then you're probably way too into Pokemon than most people, and Let's Go probably wasn't meant for you. Probably sounds like I'm answering one of my opening questions, but the aim of these games were to introduce younger players into the series based off of 2016's Pokemon Go, which also attracted a lot of older players who hadn't played since Kanto, making Generation 1 a perfect fit to justify the existence of these remakes. As you can imagine, this left many Pokemon fans, myself included, in a bit of an awkward position. Being someone that was no longer interested in Pokemon Go, was very tired with the Generation 1 pandering post X and Y, and was very much interested in a new core JRPG, Let's Go presented itself as something that wasn't aimed at me, and I went into that game with that expectation. No abilities, held items, or a lack of any new content were things that upset me, but didn't exactly disappoint. I went into these games with the expectation that they were watered down, which doesn't exactly negate those shortcomings or their impact, but I was willing to accept what I was getting into because I paid money for the games in the first place. And I also do want to get this out of the way, I enjoy Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. They're perfectly harmless games that look great, play fine, and do an alright job of remaking Kanto with new mechanics thrown in there that make the game closer to Pokemon Go, whilst keeping battles in the setting more traditional as to not completely alienate players who still want to play a Pokemon game that feels like a Pokemon game. Problem is, Let's Go splits those priorities right down the middle. I think that a lot of conversations can come from these games' existence. Does Pokemon need simplifying to this extent? Were the fans too critical of the catching system, and does it feed into a larger issue of us as fans not knowing what we want? Or how about the question of, was Let's Go needed at all considering Pokemon Go's literal billion downloads, and would that time have been better focused elsewhere? All of those are questions I aim to answer in other videos where I have more room to talk about them, but when exploring the identity of Let's Go, I always come back to one single overarching question. Do we need remakes of older Pokemon games if they're just the originals with more features on better hardware? The definition of a remake has become rather loose in the last few years when it comes to the general gaming sphere, even outside of just Nintendo. Just look at the 4 games I've got up on screen. They could all be blanketed as remakes and have been marketed as such, but their main priorities aren't exactly the most thinly veiled. The Crash and Sane trilogy aimed to make a long-dead series marketable in the eyes of its publisher to even justify its existence. Ratchet & Clank 2016 took characters, locations, and a basic premise from the original 2002 classic and hard rebooted them in an attempt to commercialize the series for a movie tie-in. Twilight Princess was a glorified port of the original assets to the Wii U with some extra modes and some poorly updated lighting, and Heart Gold and Soul Silver aimed to breathe new life into an already beloved game by keeping the groundwork almost identical but updating it with better tech and more modern series mechanics. All of them are considered remakes when in actuality one is a remake, one is a reimagining / reboot, one is a port, and one is a remaster. Now, with all of those very clearly defined examples in mind, I struggle to understand what Let's Go is or what it was trying to be. Like Crash, it was a remake of an older game with all new models and environments staying true to the original layout of the Kanto region. Like Ratchet, Let's Go attempted to smooth the originals of any rough edges in order to appeal to a newfound external audience, though rather than a movie audience, it was targeted at Pokemon Go's. Like the enhanced port of Twilight Princess, the additions to the game are rather minimal and minor, which makes the Let's Go pair feel alarmingly similar to the original Yellow after all these years. And like the other Pokemon remakes, Let's Go gives Kanto a visual facelift, whilst also improving core mechanics through now series staples such as the physical special split, the fairy type, and Wi-Fi connectivity in battles and trades, amongst many other things. Thus, you'll find it doesn't really fit into any of these sub-definitions of what remakes often amount to, which leaves the purpose of Let's Go end up feeling so confused, even when compared to the Ratchet and fucking Clank reboot. Despite my grievances with that game being the tragic mess that it was at least confident enough in what it set out to do, even if that purpose wasn't well executed. Make no mistake, I don't think Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are as poor as that game, but I think overall they would have benefited greatly from being a confused mess of remade elements to a reboot of the Kanto region under the blanket of the Let's Go sub-series. We're already in soft reboot territory as is. Red, Blue, and Green are no longer the protagonists and have already had their adventures prior to the completion of Professor Oak's Pokédex. Mega Evolution has been retroactively implemented into the story with little rhyme or reason to justify its existence. And characters from the Gold and Silver sequels like Archer and Janine clearly exist in this universe in some form. You could say that everything I've described contradicts my point and that it is a reboot of the series, leaving my identity crisis argument kinda meaningless, but the number one thing that I believe solidifies this half-hearted attempt of direction is the Kanto region itself. Kanto is by nature a very basic region, and that's okay. I love the visual landmarks such as the SSN and the Cinnabar Pokemon Mansion, even if they're kinda basic by modern Pokemon region design standards. That being said, despite seeming to deviate from the original Yellow version when it comes to past characters and lore, the Kanto region itself is almost identical to how it was 20 years ago. It's rather smooth sailing at first until you get to Mount Moon and choose your fossil. Now, there's actually some pretty smart level design built into Kanto, which lets you loop back around to get Flash and access to the Viridian Forest area once you get the ability to cut down trees. Which really begs the question as to why the fossil revival area is still all the way in Cinnabar Island. Like, we really have to wait until the end of the game to get an, at that point, obsolete water type that we've likely already got an alternative for at that point in the game. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they allowed you to revive the fossils in the Pewter Museum like every other game in the series with a museum, but strangely enough this is absent in Let's Go. It would even reward repeat playthroughs if you're willing to pick up the fossil and then backtrack through Mount Moon to get your Kabuto or Almanite early. Though the levels would be scaled accordingly, of course. Nugget Bridge and the following routes leading up to meeting Bill are the first examples of many where Kanto throws a bunch of trainers at you with absolutely zero consequence. Considering you need to go to Bill's house to get on the SSN to progress, it's very much a non-optional area, and I think that deviating from this slightly would have upped the difficulty in this area and have given you better priority to the following sequence of events. In both Yellow and Let's Go, your rival challenges you before you even step foot on Nugget Bridge, which means that if you beat him, you can just go back to the Pokemon Center without any consequence. Placing your rival at the end of the Nugget Bridge where you fight the Rocket Grunt could have led to a pretty unexpected battle for veterans, working seamlessly with the mini gauntlet posed by the trainers of Nugget Bridge. This would then lead into a multi-battle with you and your rival versus Team Rocket, which would have been the perfect introduction to Jesse and James as opposed to them just being there in Mount Moon, which is also unchanged from the original. Introducing the player to the concept of a multi-battle, the characters of Jesse and James, and a rival fight after a small but tough section would have given this part of the game much more purpose rather than just being an onslaught of boring trainer fights back to back. You could even have had a reveal of Jesse and James disguised as the leaders of Nugget Bridge, similar to how the Rocket Grunt tries to convince you to join Team Rocket and then never appears again once you beat him. It's a perfect fit and right out of how you'd expect Jesse and James's antics to go along in the anime. In fact, let's talk about Jesse and James and Let's Go. Pokemon Yellow was produced as a companion game to the anime. The most obvious reason for that being is that you have a Pikachu following alongside you at all times, just like Ash does. This also led to Jesse and James from the anime being sprinkled into the game at points, which was nice. Fast forward 20 years later, however, where the Sun and Moon anime treats Jesse and James as completely different characters to how they were in the Indigo League and put them alongside their Let's Go counterparts, where you'll see that their implementation falls apart, especially considering the context of the greater series in 2018. There's enough Team Rocket lurking in Mount Moon to have the evil gang be pretty established as is, so moving Jesse and James to that aforementioned area would do wonders in setting up their characters for a first battle as prominent rivals going forward. I know that they're blocking you from leaving Viridian City until you give Professor Oak his parcel, but they're literally just a featureless roadblock at best and not a serviceable introduction either. Unfortunately, their implementation is even more scattershot going forward throughout the game. You battle them again beneath the Celadon City Game Corner, and then not 2 minutes later at Lavender Town, which is a near identical battle with like 2 levels difference. Why not keep the double battle against Jesse and James at the hideout and move Archer to Lavender Town instead? Then we don't have the redundancy issue, we don't have Archer look like a complete wet blanket upon his introduction after getting his ass beat in front of Giovanni, and we have him be built up as more of a significant threat before his only other mandatory battle in Silphco way later down the line. Traditionalism strikes again when trainers like Giovanni just don't have a new battle theme for the sake of it. I get that he didn't have a unique battle theme in the original, but I was really looking forward to hearing Shota Kageyama's take on a menacing theme for the leader of Team Rocket, and it's so frustrating and disappointing that his talents were bottlenecked for the sake of Let's Go trying to be so close to the original Pokemon Yellow. Can we also just talk about this point of the game in particular? Between the Rocket hideout in Celadon, the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, as well as routes 12, 13, 14, and 15, the moment you leave Rock Tunnel to the moment you hit Fuchsia City is just a complete grind for trainer battles, which is especially egregious when you consider that the Rocket hideout and the Pokemon Tower feature either Rocket Grunts with the same or similar Pokemon like Rattatas and Zubats, or in the tower where the channelers only have Ghastlies and Horners because of Gen 1's terrible ghost selection. The routes that follow aren't too much better either, but Route 12 in particular has so much potential for being an entirely above water route with winding bridges and trainers, but does nothing with it and instead keeps it as blocky as it was in the original Game Boy game, which was built like that 20 years ago as a result of the system's limitations. All I need to do to prove this point is to show you the map of Kanto from Pokemon Red and Green next to the map of Kanto from Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. I think that the art looks fantastic, and no disrespect to those who drew it, but the Kanto region in concept 20 years ago looks far more inviting and open to interpretation for new additions than the one from Let's Go, and feels like a real place as opposed to literal level design. I know that it's intentional, but I wish that Let's Go didn't do such a literal interpretation of Kanto's in-game map from Generation 1 and deviated by adding or redesigning areas to modernize them instead of reminding people that yeah, this was a Game Boy game made 20 years ago. You can't retroactively implement things such as Mega Evolution and order characters in new contexts whilst leaving the core issues in design with Kanto flawed, gyms, routes, and game flow above all else, and call it a confident remake that excels overall. I know I'd much rather play Let's Go above Fire Red and Leaf Green because of the updated mechanics and visuals, but even those as remakes had an excuse to not revamp Kanto in the way that Let's Go had the ability to do. The GBA engine couldn't even implement curved terrain, and it's just so frustrating that in 2018 we somehow couldn't surpass that on the Nintendo Switch. I just don't get it. Do you want to appeal to the new, younger audience that could finally have the chance to go through a revamped Kanto with new and improved level design, catching mechanics, Pokemon Go implementation, and a more modern battle system? Or are you desperately trying to draw the older crowd back into a remade Kanto that looks the same and feels familiar, yet still suffers from all of the archaic design choices that every other game in the series has learned from since then? You can fix HMs and add new methods to Shiny Hunt, but when you very literally remake a game and expect new audiences to identify with it, I really think that you end up doing the Kanto region such a disservice, which is ironic considering it's the one that's been pushed on us quite a bit in recent memory. I must admit, I do enjoy Let's Go quite a bit, but it's so held back by the intent behind it, which really leaves me disappointed in the confused output that we got. It doesn't particularly excel to longtime fans like myself because it suffers from issues that plagued the series 20 years ago, and it doesn't excel for the new fans that end up playing a blocky reconstruction of Kanto with none of the polish that Sun and Moon or even X and Y offered with Alola or Kalos respectively. I firmly believe Let's Go to be the definitive Kanto experience, but it had the opportunity to be so much more than that, though it chose to hold itself back for the sake of attempting to appeal to every audience under the sun, whilst nailing none of them securely. I can only hope to God that if future Let's Go games are in development, they change up more of what they're remaking so that we don't have a smoothed down region of any rough edges that still somehow has the same trappings as the same region from 20 years ago. The ambition for the series is clearly there, but with the identity crisis that Pokemon seems to have, with these remakes being a particular example, it's unclear that the ambition and talent will even surface past those conceptual stages. Though I will say that if Archer's final team looks like this in Pokemon Let's Go Togepi and Marill, I guess I'm gonna have to make a follow-up video to this in 3 years' time.